Okay, good morning everybody, and welcome to another episode of Talkin' Tunes with Dr. Tony. Well, as many of you probably know, Jeff Beck is no longer with us, and there's been a lot of commentators making tributes and other things about Jeff, so I thought I would spend a few moments at the beginning of this video and share some of my impressions and memories about Jeff Beck. So you may know that there were three guitar players in the Yardbirds, and the first one was Eric Clapton, then Jeff Beck, and then Jimmy Page. And in my opinion, I think Jeff Beck was the best of the three. There are four representative albums that I want to talk about right now that I think give you a pretty good indication of what Jeff was all about. In a way, he was kind of like the David Bowie of guitar players because he was definitely a chameleon. He was always into different types of styles of music and had many personnel changes in his band. So those are the comparisons I have with David Bowie. Jeff Beck's career lasted about 60 years, about the same amount of time that I've been listening to music. So he had a very lengthy career. So the first album I want to talk about is Truth from 1968. And this album had Rod Stewart on vocals, Ronnie Wood on bass, and Mickey Waller playing drums. And this was really Rod Stewart's breakout album. As a matter of fact, when he first joined the Jeff Beck group in 1967, he was afraid to go on the stage and sing because they really didn't know how people were going to react to his voice. So he stayed in the wings with a microphone, and if the audience didn't boo or say anything negative, then he came out on the stage. So that first album, 1968 Truth, had a lot of really great cuts. So one is Beck's Bolero, which was written by Jimmy Page. And also there's a couple songs that Jeff wrote with Rod Stewart, Rockin' My Plimsoll, or Rock My Plimsoll. And they also did a version of You Shook Me, which came along before Led Zeppelin covered it. So that's a really great album. And then in 1971, he had a completely different group of musicians, and it was called the Jeff Beck Group. And the album that I wanted to talk about is Rough and Ready. That album had Bobby Tench on vocals and Max Middleton on keyboards, as well as Cozy Powell on drums. And the standout cut on that album for me is Situation, which is an interesting song because it was later recorded by Brian Auger's Oblivion Express in 1972 with Alex Lagertwood on vocals, but the song was called Truth, which is interesting because that was the name of the first Jeff Beck album, but it's not the same exactly as the Situation song on 1971 album that I've been talking about that is credited to being written by Jeff Beck. So it's just kind of interesting how these songwriting credits get kind of moved around a little bit. And then the next album I want to talk about is Blow by Blow, 1975. Now this did have Max Middleton on keyboards, and it was produced by George Martin, and it was mostly instrumental, although Jeff does singing, if you want to call it that, on the song She's a Woman by the Beatles, where he's actually singing through one of those devices that have a tube that Peter Frampton used on Frampton Comes Alive. So that's a great album. It has a lot of standout tunes, Diamond Dust, Constipated Duck, Freeway Jam, and there's also a song called 'Cause We've Ended as Lovers, which is a tribute to Roy Buchanan. That's actually kind of a copycat, note for note, of the song that Roy Buchanan recorded earlier. And I think Jeff was really cocky, and he wanted to show that he could do a song as well as any other artist. So that's an interesting cut. speaking of Roy Buchanan, it's unfortunate that he died very young. I think he was arrested for disorderly conduct, and while he was in the jail cell, he hung himself. So very sad. Another album that came out before Blow by Blow is Beck, Bogert, and Appice, or Appice. I don't know how to pronounce that name exactly. But that was a power trio album with Tim Bogert and Carmen Appice coming from Vanilla Fudge. And the standout song on that album is Superstition by Stevie Wonder, which you may have heard Jeff's version. So those are the representative albums. Jeff recorded 17 studio albums, and the last one was in 2022, interestingly with Johnny Depp. So I want to talk about the couple times that I saw Jeff in concert. The first time was at the Arms concert, and this was a tribute concert to Ronnie Lane from the Faces, who contracted muscular dystrophy. And that concert actually had Eric Clapton, Jeff Beck, and Jimmy Page. And in my opinion, Jeff Beck stole the show. It was really great. And after that, very shortly after that, I saw him at the Greek Theater in Los Angeles when the album There and Back came out, which is essentially one of his jazz fusion albums, and that was a great concert. Another thing that I want to mention about Jeff Beck is the 1966 movie called Blow Up, which was directed by Michelangelo Antonioni, and it starred David Hemmings, who was a photographer. And there's apparently some sort of a murder mystery or murder situation in that movie that David Hemmings becomes associated with. But I remember he's running down the alley and goes into the back of the club, and here are the Yardbirds playing. And it's got Jeff Beck on lead guitar and Jimmy Page on bass. And the song that they're playing is A Train Kept A-Rollin', which was later covered by Aerosmith. But at that time, it was known as Stroll On, but it's the same cut. And what's noteworthy about this clip is that Jeff Beck, apparently because he's getting some undesirable distortion coming from his amp, he ends up smashing his guitar in that clip. Later on, the movie Blow Out was remade as Blow Up in 1981 and directed by Brian De Palma, starring John Travolta. And instead of being a photographer, he's a sound effects guy. He goes out into the city and records sounds for movies. And he is actually, he listens to, I guess, a murder being committed. He records that. So that's my tribute to Jeff Beck. I covered some things that maybe others don't talk about, and but that's what I have to say. So I wanted to let you know that I've gotten some feedback about these videos, and I'm always into continuous process improvement. I want these videos to be as engaging and as intimate as possible. I want it to come across as if I'm talking to you personally as a friend. And what I used to do when I would listen to records, usually at maximum volume, I would talk to my buddies who were sitting next to me about the different songs, or maybe some other related or even an unrelated topic. But maybe we can pretend that we're doing that here. So as we talk about the albums that are going to be coming up, maybe we can pretend that we are listening to them and that we're talking about them. Now, before I get into the 4 records, I wanted to give you an update from last week where I went through the top 50 in my record collection in terms of the number of selections, and also talked about the honorable mention. I wanted to clarify that did not mean that those were my 50 favorite bands. There may be a band that I only have a few of their recordings, for example, Porcupine Tree. So don't think that just because I have a lot of selections of an artist in my library that they're my favorite. A lot of times I buy them because the price is right, or I maybe even be given them. So anyway, I just wanted to clarify that. And what I wanted to do now for a couple minutes is I wanted to add on to the demographics of my collection. I wanted to talk a little bit about the various year of the recording, and also the percentage of genre in my collection. So I made a chart, a line chart, that showed the different years of my selections. And as you can see, starting in 1965, there's not really any major standout year until we get into the 2010s and beyond. So what that tells you is that I've been pretty current in adding to my collection. Now, a lot of these records, though, from later times, they're anthologies. So I didn't go back and say they're from the 70s when they were released in 2005. But if there was a reissue, though, I went back to the original year. So this graph just gives you an idea of the representation of the years of my collection. And then I made a pie chart of the genres. And as you can see from the pie chart, 42% of my collection is designated as rock and roll. Now, when I talk about rock and roll, I'm including things like new wave, rockabilly. I don't get into any very specific categories as some people do. So there's a mixed bag included in the rock and roll. And you also can see that I have a pretty high percentage of classical, also vocals, where it's primarily just somebody singing most of the time, and I really don't look at the type of music. There's also a huge category of prog rock and also jazz. So take a little bit of time and look at that chart, and that'll give you an idea of the type of music that I'll be coming up with as we go through the future episodes. All right, so without any further delay, let's get into the 4 albums. The first one is Farther Along by the Byrds. And the Byrds, they may have invented country rock. They were there in the beginning. So a lot of bands back in the early 60s, their lives were changed when they saw the Beatles perform on Ed Sullivan. And before that, if you recall, folk music was very, very popular in our country. So a lot of those folkies, they went and got an electric guitar like the Byrds song, So You Want to Be a Rock and Roll Star, so get yourself an electric guitar. So that's what they did. They also got Beatle boots. They ended up picking up matching suits and got Beatle haircuts. So that's why I referred to the Byrds in my last video as the American Beatles. This time also influenced Bob Dylan going electric. So about the Byrds, they were very, very influential. The Eagles own a lot to the Byrds, and any type of country rock also they owe a lot to the Byrds. So this was the 11th studio album of the Byrds, and the last one, almost. In 1973, the Byrds had a tribute album, a reunion album of all 5 original Byrds, and it was a critical and commercial flop, but I have it, and I think it's really, really good. So I think time has given people perspective on that album. But recently I went on a buying spree for everything Byrds, and I picked up a 5 CD set of their last 5 albums. Sweetheart the Rodeo is in there, but Farther Along was one of those albums. And it was a self-produced album, produced in London, and it was actually a response to the album that preceded it called Bird Maniacs, which was overproduced to a large extent by Terry Melcher. Apparently Terry had overdubbed the album without the Byrds' permission. He added horns, he added strings, he added even a gospel choir. Now, Terry Melcher is an interesting guy. So he was the son of Doris Day, and he produced a lot of bands in the 60s. And he was renting the home where Sharon Tate and the others were murdered by the Manson family. So the story is Manson got connected with Dennis Wilson from the Beach Boys, and so Manson wanted to be a recording artist, and Dennis Wilson introduced him to Terry Melcher. So Terry Melcher listened to some of Manson's demos and figured out that he wasn't going to make it. So Manson, in a revenge situation, sent his family to kill Terry Melcher. Little did he not know Terry had moved. But they went in and they were probably on drugs anyway, and they killed the occupants. So it's very, very sad. One of the songs that Manson, the demos, Dennis Wilson ended up recording that on a Beach Boys album and changed the lyrics a little bit. So that's kind of interesting. But anyway, getting back to the album Farther Along, they recorded it too quickly in a lot of people's estimation, including a couple of the band members. They recorded it in 5 days, and it was the lowest charting album of their career. It didn't spend any time on the Billboard charts at all. And two of the band members, Skip Batten on the bass and Gene Parsons on drums, they did not like it. Now this album, in a way, was kind of like the original Byrds because it's a very democratic affair where all 4 members of the Byrds at that time get to write songs and sing lead vocal. But there's really not a lot of unity. The Byrds' identity as we knew it, it was gone. There's very little resemblance to the originals that the Byrds recorded around 65, 66. There's no Gene Clark, there's no Chris Hillman, there's no David Crosby, and there's no Graham Parsons. So the title song, Farther Along, that song is over 100 years old, and it's a gospel song that's sung in a lot of churches. As a matter of fact, I lead assisted living Bible studies on Sunday, and I'll bring that song in and we sing it a cappella. Now, Roger McGuinn, the only original member remaining, he only wrote one song on Farther Along, and it's Tiffany Queen. Another song that you may have heard of is called American's Great National Pastime, which is a novelty. They also covered a song from 1959 that was a hit by the Fiestas called So Fine, and the album ends with an instrumental called Bristol Steam Convention Blues. The rest of the album are cover songs, band collaborations, and as I mentioned, they all sing lead. There's good harmonies, but the songs are really short. Remember, this is 1971, and 9 of the songs are less than 3 minutes long, and 2 of them are less than 4 minutes. So there's nothing over 4 minutes long. So again, they recorded it in 5 days, and they probably were not really prepared. So it was a quick effort. But time changes things, and if you read reviews of this album today, it gets very good reviews. It's heralded as a roots rock album, a version of Americana. What's really sad about that lineup, I mentioned to you the drummer, bass, and Roger McGuinn. The guitarist was Clarence White, and he passed away in 1973. He was doing a concert after he left the Byrds in Palmdale, California, and at 2 o'clock in the morning, as he was loading his equipment in his vehicle, a drunk driver came along and killed him. So that was very, very sad. What also happened is Skip Batten, the bass player, and Gene Parsons, the drummer, they went on to join the Flying Burrito Brothers, who had Chris Hillman and Graham Parsons for a while. And Roger McGuinn had a pretty successful solo career. As a matter of fact, if you listen to the first Tom Petty album and you hear the song American Girl, you would swear it's a Byrds cover, but it's original. And interestingly, later on, Roger McGuinn recorded American Girl, so it's kind of like coming full circle. All right, that's the first album. The next one is The Traveler by Billy Cobham, 1994 release. What's interesting about this album, Billy being a drummer, he wrote all the songs. Now, for a drummer to write all the songs on a jazz album is remarkable, but you have to ask yourself, to what extent did he actually write the songs? Because he may have just wrote the basic charts, and then the guitarist and the keyboard player, bass player, they may have come and they may have embellished and developed their own parts. But anyway, Billy is credited with writing all the songs. The music is quite dense, so it does require a fair amount of listening experiences. There's piano and guitar, acoustic and electric, and there's actually 3 vocals on this album by a lady named Carol Rowley. Now, you may know Billy Cobham as the drummer from the original Mahavishnu Orchestra, and this music is nothing like Mahavishnu. It's very soothing in many spots, but it's not boring. As a matter of fact, there's a mini drum battle that Billy has with another drummer named Gary Husband, who actually played later on with John McLaughlin. He played with Alan Holdsworth, Jack Bruce, and Robin Trower, and that cut is called On the Inside Track. So there's a wide variety of music on The Traveler. There's straight ahead jazz, there's also jazz fusion, and Billy is one of the most distinctive drummers that you'll ever want to hear. He started off with Miles Davis, then went on to be with the Mahavishnu Orchestra, played with Stanley Clarke, also Larry Coryell, and before Mahavishnu, he was in a New York City-based band called Dreams for a short while. Next up is Bruce Springsteen, 1975 to 1985 Live. I bought this at the Price Club in 1986 before they became Costco. I believe that this record capitalized on the Springsteen hysteria that was going on during '86 because this came out right after Born in the USA from 1984. There were a lot of people, I believe, that jumped on the Bruce Springsteen bandwagon. For example, people that I was working with that never even professed any interest in music or going to concerts, they were now going to see Springsteen at the Los Angeles Coliseum, which I think holds maybe close to 100,000 people. So my story with Bruce Springsteen, during this time, this was when there were a lot of comments about the new Bob Dylan, and there were many of them. And Bruce Springsteen's picture was on the cover of Time and Newsweek magazines, and I kept hearing this song on the radio, but could never hear the artist, and it was 10th Avenue Freeze Out, and I really liked it. But then I had a chance to go see Bruce at the Santa Monica Civic during 1975, and I had a negative attitude, but I went along because I had nothing going on that evening. Well, as it turned out, they played the entire Born to Run album with the exception of Meeting Across the River, because that has an acoustic bass and the instrumentation is just different, and I don't think they wanted to recreate that live. But Bruce was very humble. He acted like it was a privilege for him to play for the audience as much as it was a privilege for the audience to hear him. And it was almost as if it was Al Pacino in his Serpico role as rock star. He was a great dancer, and there was a lot of interplay going on between Clarence Clemens, similarly to what Mick Jagger and Keith Richards used to do in concert. So I tell people that to really appreciate Bruce Springsteen, you have to see him live. It's hard to connect with him on records. And this album, the live album, covers songs from 1973, Greetings from Asbury Park, to Born in the USA in 1984. And these are definitely his sweet spot years, so this should be a great album. The boss is in his element. And the album was also highly rated, but for me, I rarely listen to it. But I pulled it out yesterday and listened to it, and things start out well with what is arguably his best song, Thunder Road. It only has Roy Bittan on piano, with Danny Federici on glockenspiel and Bruce playing harmonica. And I love songs that begin with Roy Bittan's piano intros. But ever since I saw him in '85, when I listened to the studio albums, I reimagined how Bruce performed live. And that's a better listening experience for me because the studio albums just sound so much better. But on this live recording, his voice seems to be straining on too many cuts. And if you think about it, this album is from 11 years of live recordings. You think his performances would have been better. But one of the curse of many singers is that they're able to sing well in studio in terms of screaming or singing at a high key. But if they try to do it night after night, year after year, while they're on tour, they just can't do it. And Robert Plant is probably the worst offender of this, because as early as the 1980s, he was not able to recreate his Led Zeppelin singing live. So the worst offenders in this album for Bruce's screaming are Spirits in the Night, It's Hard to Be a Saint in the City, You Can Look But You Better Not Touch, Badlands, Darkness on the Edge of Town, and 10th Avenue Freeze Out. The ballads fare better, for example, Independence Day and Racing in the Street. And it's also great to hear songs that are not on studio albums. For example, Fire, recorded by the Pointer Sisters, and Because of the Night, recorded by Patti Smith. The other thing I noticed is that the scream from one of my favorite studio albums, Backstreet, on Born to Run, is missing in the live recording. But Rosalita sounds great. He's in his sweet spot. Also, Steve Van Zandt and Bruce, they do a cover of Raise Your Hand, which is an R&B song. The Promised Land sounds great. And also, Bruce needs more stories like he tells Before the River, which he does a lot in concert. And he does tell a great story here about some of the issues he had with his dad and his long hair. And that's a great song. And also, I think that The River is done beautifully on this album, and it perhaps is his second best song overall. All right, the last album is James Taylor, and the recording is Mudslide Slim and the Blue Horizon, his third studio album from 1971. His first album was on Apple, and that was a very different production with a lot of strings and orchestration. George Harrison had a lot of work in that album. But Mudslide Slim is very much a continuation of Sweet Baby James. There's not as many hits, but it does have James Taylor's #1 song, which is Carole King's You've Got a Friend. But the lyrics are a little bit different. Rolling Stone and Village Voice both gave this album a bad review. In terms of the studio musicians on this album, we have Danny Korchmar, called Cooch, on guitar, Leland Sklar on bass, Russ Kunkel on drums, and Carole King on piano. And just like the Wrecking Crew, consisting of Carol Kay, Hal Blaine, and other people who played on a lot of the Monkees and the Beach Boys songs in the 50s, and like the Funk Brothers on Motown, there was a similar group of musicians that played in the 1970s on the California folk rock music. Joni Mitchell sings backup vocals on Long Ago and Far Away. Mudslide Slim was a double platinum album, #2 on the Billboard charts. And interestingly, for the next 30 years, every album that James Taylor had sold more than 1 million copies, which is a major accomplishment. I like Let Me Ride, which is a cool blues song with the Memphis Horns. So if you need to relax and want something easy to listen to, especially with when you're frazzled, JT is an artist to go to. Well, that's it for today. I wanted to let you know that I'm planning a couple special editions. One is on 3 albums in succession that artists recorded that were major hits. And another one is looking at cover songs that are better than the originals. So if you like those ideas, let me know. Also, subscribe to the video if you've not. Post some comments and like the video if you liked it. I'll talk with you later. Have a great day.